Hey everybody, and welcome to This Week in Hell. I'm your host, John Wilkie. First up this week, we had the presidential debate between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. That took place on the 10th. I think that was a Tuesday. Went quite well, I think. Well, at least for her it did. For him, it seems to be in a bit more of an embarrassment. It was very odd. I didn't watch the whole thing, but from what I've seen of it, she greeted him, and that seems to have annoyed some of her voter base. And others are saying, well, it was the right thing to do. Others are saying it was a power move, and that she was taking control of the situation. Either way, it seems like a silly thing to get upset over, just being basically courteous to your opponent, even when that opponent is Donald Trump. Guarantee if she'd done anything else, the other side would have had things to complain about. And they already complain as much as it is. However, it was a very odd thing. He seemed to go off on tangents and talk about things that hadn't even happened. The fact checkers there did a semi-decent job. They were actually correcting the candidates in real time. He made the statement that apparently migrants in Ohio are eating people's pets, which is vehemently false. I don't know where that came from, but some nonsense he went with. He said that migrants are coming from prisons and asylums, which is also it's just not true. It's been proven to be false. That's not to say that both of them didn't say things that were wrong, but in the case of Kamala Harris, it was more a matter of things that were perhaps not fully accurate, or she was misremembering some things, but there was some truth in what she was saying. No outright lies, whereas Trump was just saying absolute falsehoods. Perhaps he believed them to be true. That may be a sign of the fact that he is not as mentally competent as they would have us believe. One candidate already stepped down, so perhaps it would be time for him to step down and let someone a bit more competent, a bit younger, take over. I'm of the belief that there should be an age limit as well as an age minimum to run for any political office, regardless of whichever country you're in. And I think being in your 70s should exclude you from that. Other opinions are welcome, so let me know what you think about that in a comment below. Okay. As it stands right now, it seems that Harris is actually pulling a little bit better than Trump. It's not much. There's not much in it at the moment. Even though she is ahead, it really could go either way when it comes down to the actual getting bodies into voting booths. And of course, the Electoral College is a tricky beast. And I'm not sure I fully understand how it works, but however it does work, it's weird. Next up, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer is now talking about NHS reform. That is a continual refrain among politicians. And it's a good idea. The NHS, it does a good job with what they have, but things could of course be better. I'll talk about my personal experiences in a moment. They're generally good. He's saying there'll be no more funding without reform, and we can't duck long-term change. This isn't just going to be solved by more money, it's solved by reform. They're proposing things such as having more things done on the high street, more video consultations, essentially putting a bit more of what you're having hospitals do in the ballpark of GPs doing on a smaller, more local scale. That's not necessarily a bad thing, and I'll be curious to see how they implement that in the long run. It might bring waiting lists down if they can do things on a more immediate basis. Well, that makes perfect sense, doesn't it? But if they can do things on a more local way, so you don't have to wait to get to a hospital to have certain things done. But we'll see how that shakes out. Speaking personally, I've benefited greatly as a British citizen from the NHS over the years. I actually have an appointment with my dermatologist tomorrow because those who are long-term viewers of the channel will know that I have a skin condition. I have what I will generously call an aggressive form of psoriasis. As in, when it's at its worst, it frequently is, it covers over 95% of my body. I'm in great pain when it's like that. It is difficult to move. I'm essentially heavily debilitated. Even walking is painful. quite frankly, rolling over in bed is painful when it's like that. I'm not saying this to get sympathy, because it's just something I deal with. The first time it happened, I genuinely didn't want to live. The pain was so bad, and I didn't know if it was ever going to get better. The other times it's happened, it's still not been fun, but I've at least known that there is help available. Contact the right people. You get the help. You recover. You get back to normal. And I'm actually not bad right now. A couple of little bits that are actually healing and going away. I'm on a medication called acetretin right now, for anyone who's wondering for it. And you stay moisturized, and you just take care of yourself as much as you can with diet. Although I haven't given up caffeine. Actually, after 2 years of not having caffeine, I started enjoying it again, because it really wasn't making a difference because of the way my skin is. It comes back, it goes away, it comes back, it goes away. But the NHS has, for the most part, treated me pretty well. They're very nice people in my local hospital, the Monklands Hospital, and I have no complaints. The only thing I would say was they did try coal tar treatment on me at one point, and it did work, but it is a disgusting, humiliating treatment, which thankfully I don't think they offer anymore. But that being said, it doesn't mean improvement couldn't be made for other areas, but dermatology for my own hospital has always treated me very, very well. Next few stories are more entertainment related. First up, Good Omens. I say it that way because that's how they say it at the start of the audiobook. The one by Martin Jarvis. I am a huge fan of Good Omens. I enjoy it so much I've bought it 4 times. I would have bought it a 5th time if the Stephen Briggs version of the audiobook was still available. So I own the audiobook twice, Martin Jarvis. Then there's a full cast recording with David Tennant, Martin Sheen, other people. I think, who else? You know what? I'm not going to name everyone that was in it, but a full cast recording. Some very talented people involved with it. And there was also the BBC play they did. Bought that as well. So, 4 copies. And I enjoyed the TV show too. However, because Neil Gaiman is a creepy creeper who has done a number of nasty manipulative things, allegedly, to 5 women at present, that number may go up. I'm going to do a deep dive into that. I'm just steeling myself for it because it's going to be a lot of very gross unpleasantness to learn about. I know the broad strokes as it is right now, and what's happened is he's had accusations made against him of inappropriate behaviour going over decades, which has made him go radio silent, obviously at the advice of his lawyers, and he's hired a media firm that is well known for representing men who have done very bad things, Russell Brand being among them, and others as well. So that brings us to people wondering what was going to happen with projects he's working on that are in development, because Neil Gaiman is an author, but there's currently a number of projects, 3 off the top of my head, that are based on his work. Good Omens, which he wrote with Terry Pratchett, and we'll get more into that in a bit. There's Anansi Boys, which, as far as I understand, has finished filming and is in post-production, so I'll be curious to see what happens with that, because I was looking forward to it until these allegations come out. And then, of course, there's Season 2 of Sandman, which they're actually filming right now. I believe there were set pictures of Stephen Fry, unless that was from Season 1, but I think it was from Season 2. So we'll see what happens with that. Netflix has made no announcement about whether or not they're pulling the show. It would be a financially interesting choice if they did, and the others involved with the production have done nothing wrong, as far as I know. Maybe some questionable acting choices. Patton Oswalt, I'm looking at you. I love you, but I'm looking at you. But we'll see what happens with Sandman, because they may no longer want to be associated with Gaiman. He was also working quite heavily on Season 3 of Good Omens. There was only one Good Omens book, which they did in Season 1, but they've done a 2nd and a 3rd season. Season 2 was essentially its own thing. I actually quite enjoyed it. Other people are retroactively finding it bad. Some people may not have enjoyed it initially, but it's interesting seeing how people are reframing the fact that they did enjoy his work is now it's actually bad, though, now that it's known that he did bad things. Personally, I don't think good work suddenly becomes bad when the person who created it has done bad things. You just might not want to enjoy it anymore. I know there's certainly people whose work that I've liked, J.K. Rowling, who I no longer enjoy, not because the work suddenly became bad, although there are valid criticisms of her work because they themselves did bad things. Warren Ellis, who we'll actually touch on briefly later in this, in the In Memoriam section, he's not dead, but someone that worked with him has died. I still enjoy his work, but he himself has done some not nice things. But getting back to Neil Gaiman, I went on a tangent there. This is stuff I'll save for the Neil Gaiman overview and the critique of the activities he's done. But getting back to that, we get to season 3 of Good Omens, which is allegedly maybe based on 668, The Neighbour of the Beast, which was an unwritten, allegedly plotted with him and Terry Pratchett. Apparently they did it in a hotel one night. They both couldn't sleep, so they just kind of, sat there, lay there, and plotted a sequel they never wrote. No one on the Pratchett side of things have said that didn't happen, so let's just assume it did. And this is what I mean when I'm talking about how people are reframing things. People are saying, well, he's probably lying when he says he and Terry plotted it for the money, but he's as he said to one of his victims, I'm a very wealthy man. Said other things as well, but he's a rich man. He doesn't need the money, so maybe it's just ego. But this 3rd season is happening. Or maybe it's not, because they were working on it. Amazon announced that they were pausing production, not cancelling it, pausing production, and then a day after that, Gaiman himself has said that he's apparently offered, well, word is he's offered to step back. Not away, but step back, so he'll no longer be running things as directly as he was, and other, quite frankly, more talented people could come in, because he's a good author, but he is amateurish as a filmmaker. Not bad, but there's choices and decisions he's made in his productions that, one, he's made for the sake of being different, because he's one of those people, if it's weird and different, he likes it. The fact of it being different means he likes it, which is kind of an immature viewpoint. I remember when I was little, I'd always want the thing that was different. I'd want the cake that was different, the thing, the whatever else it was, just because it was different. Most of us grew out of that. It seems he never did. And some other choices, but on the whole, the things he's made have been okay. They've been enjoyable. They've been watchable. There's just criticisms that could be made there. But he's seemingly going to step away, possibly, and then other people will take over. I think they have been trying to lay the groundwork for this, because it's never been disputed that Terry Pratchett wrote more of Good Omens than Neil Gaiman did. I think, don't quote me on these exact numbers, but I think Gaiman said he wrote about 45,000 raw words, and Terry Pratchett wrote about 65,000 raw words. Pratchett himself says he wrote about 2/3 of it himself, by which he was referring to the physical hitting the keys, actual writing. And Rhianna Pratchett came out recently and said her dad wrote 75% of the book. Don't think that's 100% accurate. I'm not saying that it's untrue that he wrote most of the book. I definitely think he did. But I think it's all on how you look at it here, because I'm seeing people arguing that, and this is speculation on my part. I'm casting no aspersions against Rhianna Pratchett. I think putting that out there before Amazon announces a pause, then allegedly Gaiman has proposed to step away, is laying the groundwork for them to continue with the show and to sort of separate from Gaiman a bit. However, this is based on a book that Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett wrote together. Terry Pratchett himself said that while he did most of the physical writing, they were on the phone to each other every day, plotting the book out. They would send floppy disks, oh yes, floppy disks, back and forth in the mail to each other, and they would this was them sending bits of the book to each other. They would each write bits, they would send it to the other guy would rewrite and footnote. You would then send it off to the other guy, so Gaiman would send to Pratchett would send to Gaiman, and then rewrite and footnote each other's bits. So by the end of it, they had each written or rewritten every character, regardless of who was doing the lion's share of the work. My point is, there's a clear attempt to separate Gaiman from the work here, to make it okay to continue. It's okay, we can continue to enjoy it because he's not really that involved with this book that he's clearly been heavily involved with since the very moment he wrote it with Pratchett. His fingers are all over this. His influence is all over this. It is based on something that he wrote. He created the initial idea. The initial idea was it was going to be a demonic version of the Just William books, which is actually why I imagine, for quite frankly the best version of the audiobook, they got Martin Jarvis to do it, because Martin Jarvis also narrated the Just William books. You cannot separate Neil Gaiman from this. It's just an exercise in futility or delusion if you try to. He is as heavily involved with it as he was. Like Pratchett himself said, 2 guys wrote a book. That's not an exact quote, but that's essentially what he said. They got together, they wrote it. It belongs to them both equally. The ideas are both of theirs, so you cannot separate either one of them from it, for whatever the motivation might be. So I think the best thing to do with Good Omens, if the idea is to distance from Gaiman, is just not make Season 3. Just move on. Anyway, that's a lot of rambling. So, let's move on to the next story, and it's not any more fun. Okay, next up, kind of a lot's been happening regarding this next story. Linkin Park hired a new singer after, I believe it was about 7 years, or thereabouts, after Chester Bennington's suicide. Her name is Emily Armstrong. Got a pretty solid voice, a voice that fits in well with their style of music. So, on the surface, she seemed like a good choice. Except there's baggage that comes with Emily Armstrong. Now, she's formerly of the band Dead Sarah. That's not the baggage, that's just a bit of information for you. And she is currently a Scientologist. Speaking personally, if I hear the work of somebody I enjoy as a Scientologist, I feel a bit uncomfortable with it, but I can still enjoy the work they did. But her association with Scientology comes with a few unfortunate extras. For those who may not know, Danny Masterson, the actor from That 70s Show, among other things, was accused of SA. We'll censor this as much as we can to keep the algorithm happy. Was accused of and convicted of multiple counts of SA. More accusations than he was actually convicted of. It's just, of course, it has to be provable with beyond reasonable doubt. Personally, I think he was guilty of all of them, and my support is with the Jane Does, which is the collective term for the victims in this case. And the problem with this is Emily Armstrong showed up at the arraignment. So as she said, she was only there for 1 day. She shows up at the arraignment in support of Danny Masterson. And it's also been confirmed by one of the people who was associated with the Jane Does that she was among the group of Scientologists harassing the Jane Does, or one of the Jane Does rather, let's not spread misinformation, harassing one of the Jane Does outside the court. So she wasn't there as a passive observer, she was, allegedly, harassing one of these women on behalf of Scientology and Danny Masterson. That's problematic as well. It gets worse when you consider that Chester Bennington was a victim of childhood abuse. He suffered from mental illness. Scientology has also had multiple accusations of mistreating children, like slave labor and other things. This is coming from people who were Scientologists in their youth, who were raised in it, who got out. They're saying these things happened to children. They don't believe in therapy. They don't believe in medication for mental illness, which is highly problematic. Jamie Bennington, Chester Bennington's, I think his 28-year-old son, was apparently for reasons that confuse me, is apparently planning to attend this concert. Or one of the recent concerts. If anything happens to me or my partner while we are attending this concert, it is on Linkin Park. I don't really know why he would go in that situation. If I was him, I'd just stay away. I mean, it's not his father's band anymore. There's obviously bad blood between them. I'd stay away personally, but he and his partner have chosen not to. I've pulled a lot of what I know of Scientology from the channel Growing Up in Scientology by Aaron Smith-Levin. I'm not going to get into the details of that. I've heard some negative things said about him, but in the early days of the channel it was very informative, and his more recent videos, at least on this subject, are pretty informative as well. I have personal feelings about his personality, but we don't need to get into that. He's part of the network of channels called SPTV, which is Suppressive Person Television, and they're a group of former Scientologists just spreading the word about all the bad things that have gone on within that cult. Also worth noting that Emily is a lesbian, and it is highly frowned upon to be gay, as in it is not really allowed at all to be gay within Scientology. We could talk about the John Travolta of it all there. It's generally known that Travolta is gay, and that's why even he's not allowed, although he is useful to them, he's not allowed to ascend to their higher levels because he's gay. Or bisexual, depending on how you want to look at it. I hear the term gay used a lot. Now, I'm going to read Emily's statement for you. She did put out a statement clarifying some issues, and it seems to have gone over well with those who needed it to go over well. I will say I'm impartial here. I'm not a Linkin Park fan. I think I like the song Crawling. Was that one of theirs? That's the only one I remember. That was okay, but I don't really have a strong opinions on them breaking up, getting back together. I mean, actually, you know what? I think if a band wants to get back together and continue making music under their best known name, that's completely reasonable. Chester Bennington was not their first lead singer. He was not a founding member of the band. So if they want to continue on with that, best of luck to you. And I don't believe it's unreasonable to replace band members as time goes on. I mean, look at Journey. They have had so many singers over the years, and they're still Journey. Their current singer is actually very good. But Emily's statement read, "Hi, I'm Emily. I'm new to so many of you, and I wanted to clear the air about something that happened a while back. Several years ago, I was asked to support someone I considered a friend at a court appearance, and went to one early hearing as an observer." You'll note she doesn't name that friend. "Soon after, I realized I shouldn't have. I always try to see the good in people, and I misjudged him." Again, not naming the friend or what they'd done. "I have never spoken with him since. Unimaginable details emerged, and he was later found guilty." What details? What was he found guilty of? Again, you're not addressing it, nor are you speaking about the victims in this case. She makes literally no mention of Danny Masterson's victims, the Jane Does. "To say it as clearly as possible, I do not condone abuse or violence against women, and I empathize with the victims of these crimes." That is a general statement on those crimes, and it does not address the Jane Does specifically. Essentially, and this is why I mentioned the channel Growing Up in Scientology earlier, because that's where I saw that this statement more analysed, and other former Scientologists have said the same thing. This statement is very carefully worded not to apologise to the victims of Danny Masterson's crimes for participating in harassing one of them, for supporting Danny Masterson. It's not designed to do that. It's designed to try and take the heat off of her, but not offend Scientologists. And that's all I'm going to say on that for now. And next up, we're going to talk about Peter Cushing. And yes, we're keeping it current this week. What's happened is, if you'll recall, Peter Cushing's face appeared in the movie Rogue One, digitally recreated with Guy Henry. Was it Guy Henry? Yeah, Guy Henry, doing the physical part, which I've always felt was an odd choice. They've obviously shown they're willing to recast people to play versions of characters in these roles. And Guy Henry does quite resemble Peter Cushing a bit. You would never mistake one for the other. I mean, certainly if there was a lineup, you had to pick Peter Cushing, you'd pick Peter Cushing. You wouldn't mistake him for him. Similar enough that had you put him in that role, in that costume, I think people would have been fine with it. The resemblance is strong enough that I think the audience would have went with it. It would also have looked a lot better, because what they ultimately came up with for the Grand Moff Tarkin, the digital version of Grand Moff Tarkin, it looked like Peter Cushing, but it also looked like a digitally recreated Peter Cushing. I respect the work that went into it, but it just wasn't there yet. Technology has improved even in the 8 years it was since then, so it might look a little bit better now, with perhaps a little more time invested in it, because oftentimes between good and bad visual effects, time is literally the only factor, which is why we've heard so much recently about studios complaining or getting thrown under the bus when the production throws the effects studios under the bus, saying, oh, well, they did a bad job. Well, they didn't. They just weren't given enough time. But what happened here is Kevin Francis of Tyburn Film Productions is claiming that he actually had a contract with Peter Cushing that they established during the prep for, what was it, A Heritage of Horror, a film that they planned but was not completed, and he's now seeking £500,000 in compensation for a violation of that contract. Why he's only coming out 8 years later to make these claims and not at the time, because it was very, very highly publicized. It's unlikely that he wouldn't have known this was happening at the time. Even I, as the most casual of Star Wars fans, as in I haven't seen any of the new movies, I haven't even seen Rogue One, knew this was happening. So it's very odd that he's coming out all these years later. I'm sure he'll have his reasons, perhaps we'll find as the case unfolds. High Court Judge Tom Mitchison stated, I am also not persuaded that the case is unarguable to the standard required to give summary judgment or to strike it out. He essentially had said he wasn't sure that Kevin Francis could win this case, but, he thinks maybe there's enough there to let it go to trial. He also added, in an area of developing law, it is very difficult to decide where the boundaries might lie in the absence of a full factual inquiry. What had happened here is Lucasfilm, and by extension Disney, had proceeded with including Cushing in the movie, assuming that, one, the contract they had with him from Star Wars pre-existing allowed them to do it. I think that's a little bit shaky, as Rogue One, while yes, it was the same character, it was in the Star Wars universe, it was a separate film. But they did also get permission from Peter Cushing's estate. And they paid him a little money, I think about £28,000. Nice work for doing nothing, right? If anyone wants to send £28,000 my way for just sitting here doing nothing, feel free to, else I won't say no. And that seemed fine. The family got paid, nice chunk of change. They got permission to use Cushing's likeness, and they made the movie. Then 8 years later, there's now a court case. I'm very curious to see where it goes. I don't think it's going to set a precedent. I don't think he's going to win. I don't think he has a very strong case here. It's going to come down to the detailing and the wording of the language, and why no one in Cushing's estate seemed to have documentation of this deal. So he is suing Lucasfilm. He's suing Cushing's estate. I believe the two people involved have passed away now, but don't quote me on that one. But it's just something I read casually in passing. I think they've passed away now. And essentially anyone involved with the production of the movie seems to be getting sued. There was someone else who was mentioned, but I can't recall at the moment. So yeah, that is a developing story. It's an interesting story. And there's a lot of questions to be asked, which will likely never get answered, because I think it's ultimately going to be thrown out. I'm not going to make any accusations here, because it could be that Kevin has a very strong case and we just don't know it. We haven't seen the documents. But I would be surprised if Disney settles this one out of court. I think they'll go all the way on this one. And before we go for today, we have In Memoriam. We're saying goodbye to two people today. First up is comic book artist John Casaday. He was an Eisner Award-winning, self-taught artist who originally came from Texas. He actually directed TV news before he got into comics, which happened in the mid-90s. Best-known works are probably Astonishing X-Men and Planetary. Planetary is actually a favourite of mine. I think I read a little bit of his run on Astonishing X-Men. Yeah, he wrote that with Joss Whedon, which less said about that the better. And he worked on Planetary with Warren Ellis, and less said about that the better. Why is it the work of so many people I enjoy turn out to be not nice, to varying degrees? But Planetary was a favourite comic of mine, and the work he did in that was just so wonderful because there was multiple genres in that. At one point, it seemed like each issue dealt with a different genre. You would have like the action movie, the Japanese monster movie. There were superheroes. There was one issue that was essentially an issue of Constantine. The character in it was called Jack Carter, but he was, for all intents and purposes, he was an allegory of John Constantine. Although by the end of it, he ended up turning into Spider Jerusalem from the Transmetropolitan comics. And while Casaday didn't do most of the work on Transmet, he actually did work on, it was one of the additional pieces of media that came out afterward. It was a collection of faux news articles and had multiple artists working on it. It was called Transmetropolitan I Hate It Here, which was a refrain of the character Spider Jerusalem because he hated working in the city. He just wanted to get back to his peaceful mountain retreat. I can sympathise with that, away from the chaos of the world. And John Casaday did some work for that as well. He was a wonderful, wonderful artist. He'd been admitted to hospital on September 3rd. We don't quite know what the situation was there. We don't quite know what caused his passing. But he was admitted on September 3rd and he passed away on the 9th of September. His sister Robin put out a brief statement that said, "My little bro John passed away at 6:51 Texas time. Please keep me and my mom in your prayers." He was 52 years old. And lastly today, another Star Wars connection actually, is James Earl Jones. This one makes me really sad. He's one of those people, he's like the fabric of the world. They're just such a consistent presence. They show up in so many things. My favourite character was King Jaffe Joffer from the Coming to America movies. He actually reprised his role in the second movie they did more recently. And every role he showed up in, he was in an episode of Frasier at one point. He played an older gentleman who he was blind, and Frasier accidentally broke this life mask his wife had made because it was a reminder of what his wife's face looked like. And it was just such an endearing performance in there, just always very easing. You felt very comfortable watching him whenever he was on screen. Even hearing him as, did you know he played Darth Vader? Even hearing him as the voice of Darth Vader, who was a villain, was still very comforting. Now, of course, he was in The Lion King and many other things. I mean, back in his earlier days, he actually joined the Reserve Officers Training Corps, and this was as tensions were heating up with the Korean War. He actually ended up not having to be deployed. He thought he might be. He was fairly sure he would be, but I think the Korean War ended before he actually got his commission. And it was around this time he got into theatre and acting. He initially started working as a carpenter, and he eventually, a couple of years later, between 55 and 57, moved into acting and even stage management. Had a very long and impressive career in film, TV, and theatre. This world is definitely less without someone like him in it, I feel. It should be noted that you will likely continue to hear his voice, or something passing for his voice, for quite some time to come, as he, while alive, with his permission, so it's all above board, did make a deal with Lucasfilm / Disney that they could recreate his voice with AI for future projects. And that's fair. It means his family hopefully will continue to get a nice little chunk of change out of that. He died at his home in Dutchess County in New York, and he was 93 years old. And that brings us to the end of This Week in Hell. I'm having a debate with myself about whether or not to keep doing them on this channel or move them to their own separate channel. I can't upload 2 additional videos. That's why one day a week I don't do a Reddit reading, I do This Week in Hell. So I'm not putting like massive additional content on the channel. So it might have to go to its own channel. Unfortunate, but it might be the way things have to be. To then give me space to try other things, like I mentioned the Neil Gaiman documentary. But the accusations against Neil Gaiman, and that would mean putting up 7 or 8 videos in a week, and I don't think YouTube likes it when you put up too many videos. I think they deprioritize what you're getting, how your videos rank when you do it that way. So it's a matter of trying things out for as long as I'm able to, and trying to fix things, and hopefully something hits. I figure it will eventually, it's just a matter of how much time I have to do it. Maybe I'll find a rich sugar daddy. Oh wait, no, I'm getting married, I'm not allowed to do that. Okay, I'll just keep plugging away and see what we can do. So until next time, thank you very much for watching, and take very good care of yourselves.